Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hello, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl Podcast. So, picture this. You wake up in the morning, finally free from the bloating and gut discomfort that seem to follow you everywhere, but then you take a bite of your breakfast and suddenly you're bloated again. And you're at a point where you feel like you just can't eat anything without having gut symptoms. You're doing everything you can to heal, and yet every single food you eat seems like it's working against you. Does this sound familiar? Ask me how I know. If you're feeling exhausted from battling unpredictable food sensitivities on top of endometriosis, you're not alone, and there's hope. So in today's episode, I'll be unpacking the connection between food sensitivities, gut health, and endometriosis, and I'll be sharing tools to help you pinpoint and manage your unique food triggers without sacrificing the joy of eating. By the end of this episode, you'll feel empowered with new insights and strategies to make food your ally, not your enemy. As a functional nutritionist, helping my clients to pinpoint their unique food sensitivities is a huge part of what I do in my daily work, so I wanted to take some time to share these insights with all of you. But first, let's go through some myths. So myth number 1. Food sensitivities don't really impact endometriosis symptoms. It's just a coincidence if you feel worse after eating certain foods. Truth, actually, food sensitivities can directly influence endometriosis symptoms, but not in the way that you might think. I'll explain all of that in today's episode. Myth number 2. If you don't have food allergies, you don't need to worry about food sensitivities. Truth, allergies and sensitivities are not the same thing, and sensitivities can still play a big role in your gut health and endometriosis symptoms. We'll dive into why this difference matters in just a bit. Myth number 3, to manage food sensitivities, you need to cut out all the potential triggers and follow a super restrictive diet. Truth, while certain foods can be triggers, strict restriction isn't the only way to find relief. There's a more balanced approach that we're going to explore today. All right, so let's dive in. Let's start today with unpacking why food sensitivities matter for endometriosis. So, for starters, as I've talked about many times before on this podcast, endometriosis is primarily an immune dysfunction. It's not primarily a reproductive or a hormonal issue like was previously thought. I talk about this much more in depth on some previous episodes, episode 5, What is Endometriosis Really?, as well as episode 48, which was an interview with Dr. Sarah Wilson. I will link to those in the show notes if you want to hear more about that piece of it, because today we're going to just focus in on the food sensitivity part of that. So the basic story here is that food sensitivities spark an immune reaction, and that can contribute to inflammation in your gut, which can contribute to the systemic inflammation that comes with endo. Because remember, about 80% of your immune system lives in your gut, and so when that immune system is reacting to foods, that can actually impact your whole entire body. I know that in school we're taught that your digestive system and your reproductive system and your immune system are all these separate pieces. But the truth is that everything is very interconnected in your body, and understanding that and learning to work with that is a very important part of healing. So pinpointing food sensitivities, eliminating some of the heavy offenders, and supporting your gut and immune system can be a huge support for endometriosis and actually can allow you to eat more variety of foods in the long run. So, what foods might you actually be sensitive to? We're going to look more into this, but common ones include things like gluten and dairy are probably the top two that I see, and might also include things like soy and corn, but this is a little bit more individual. We're going to circle back to exactly how to determine your unique food sensitivities, but first, let's take a look at why these sensitivities develop, especially if you're someone who feels like they're sensitive to everything. So, I want to introduce you, if you haven't heard this before, to a concept called leaky gut. And basically, what happens with leaky gut is that within your digestive tract, within your intestines, there is a barrier that's only one cell thick, which isn't very big. One cell is itty bitty as far as a barrier goes, but that's the barrier that basically protects what's between what's inside of your gut to your bloodstream that's on the other side of that single cell barrier. And it's supposed to be, there's what's known as tight junctions where the cells are basically very close together. They're snugged in there. And so it becomes a barrier where it only allows in certain nutrients that are absorbed to actually reach the bloodstream. However, that barrier can become damaged, which can happen from large undigested food particles. Gluten is definitely a major offender when it comes to that as well. And what happens is that when that gut barrier becomes damaged, now instead of just allowing specific nutrients and things to pass through to the bloodstream, now there's a lot of large food particles that are coming directly into contact with the bloodstream. And that's where the immune system lives, and that's where that reactivity can happen. So that's really why it's called leaky gut. It's not like your gut itself is leaking, but basically there are things getting through that gut barrier wall that shouldn't be, and that really can cause a lot of reactivity. So that's actually one of the first things that I look at when someone comes to me and just says they have tons and tons of food sensitivities and allergies and things are coming up that maybe hadn't been an issue in the past, especially if new food sensitivities or it seems like are developing all the time. That's the first thing that I look to, because like anything, it becomes kind of a slippery slope. That damage to the gut lining begins to happen, and so that allows these large food particles to come in contact with the immune system, which causes this reactivity, and then that can just compound over time to where all of a sudden you have tons of food sensitivities. So that's definitely an important part of the work that I do with my clients, is supporting leaky gut. Avoiding things that will aggravate leaky gut is a big part of that. So gluten is definitely a big one. If we're doing a gut healing protocol, I always recommend going gluten-free during that time because the gluten can be very irritating to the gut. I actually also have my clients largely go grain-free and looking at their unique food sensitivities that could potentially be aggravating the gut lining. Because you do want to avoid some of those offenders that can contribute to that leaky gut kind of situation. At the same time, to support that leaky gut, you also want to be supporting the process of your food being broken down properly before it gets into the intestines. And that involves supporting your digestion from the level of your stomach, supporting stomach acid and enzymes so that your food is actually broken down properly so that large food particles aren't there because they've been broken down and they're no longer able to continue to cause damage onto your gut and cause you to develop more food sensitivities. So you can see it's kind of a multi-part process here. That's why I always say it's not always as simple as just the food. There's a lot more to it that you have to consider when it comes to doing this healing work. And then at the same time, we want to help with the healing process. We want to allow the gut to be able to rebuild, to be able to heal and seal that gut lining. So there are quite a few different nutrients that are very soothing to the gut and help to seal that gut lining. Things like L-glutamine, slippery elm, DGL, which is a type of licorice, aloe vera extract, marshmallow root, zinc carnosine, I personally, in my practice, I have some supplements that have a nice blend of some of these nutrients that I like to use. If you are, I would recommend, working with a practitioner if you're, looking to use specific digestive supports and things just to make sure that you are not doing more harm than good on your body. But there are also things that you can do to help to support your gut health just on a day-to-day basis through diet. So supports like bone broth is a really great one for that gut lining, as is collagen. So you can buy collagen as a powder and add it to things like smoothies and even baked goods and all kinds of things. So those are a couple of good options as well. Okay, so next up, we're going to look into how to determine your unique food sensitivities. Now, I do want to note on this, you want to do this at the same time as you're doing the gut healing work. That's a part that a lot of people miss. It's one of the mistakes that I see commonly is that people do these huge elimination diets, but they're not doing gut healing work at the same time, or sometimes vice versa. Sometimes they're doing some good gut healing work, but not looking into food sensitivities at the same time. And when you're tackling one but not the other, you're missing like half of the puzzle. So you really want to kind of tag team and hit it from both ends at the same time for the best results. So really there are two options for determining food sensitivities. You can test or you can do an elimination diet. And there are pros and cons to each. I actually use both methods with my clients in my practice, kind of depending on budget and symptoms and needs. Everybody's a little bit different. So testing is more expensive, but it kind of can get straight to the point. Now, there are a lot of different types of food sensitivity testing, so I did want to touch on that. The one that I use in my practice when I use food sensitivity testing, which again is not always, is called the MRT. And it's a blood test. You actually have to go into a lab to have blood drawn. And that actually measures multiple types of immune reactions, and it measures that reaction directly in the blood. So it's a more direct approach. There are a lot of kind of over-the-counter saliva tests that are fairly inexpensive, but I also find that they don't get the most accurate results because A, they're testing saliva, and B, they're only testing one type of immune reaction, so they may be missing other types of immune reactions at the same time. So you're spending less money, but you also might be kind of throwing your money out the window if you're not getting super accurate results from some of those tests. There are also true allergy tests like you would typically do in a doctor's office where they do the prick test. That is, again, a different type of immune response. That's a true allergic response that they're looking for. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of immune reactions, but just know that there are different types of immune reactions. And so you want to be kind of looking at that from all angles because there's food allergies, there's food intolerance, there's different ways that your body can react. So just something to be aware of. And then there's also the option of an elimination diet. It's free to do or essentially free. Of course, you have to buy food, but you have to do that anyway. It does take longer because you're having to go through that elimination process. And even the range of an elimination diet can vary quite a bit depending on your needs. So that can be a rather simple elimination type diet where maybe you're just eliminating those big offenders like gluten, dairy, soy, and corn. Sometimes grains in general can be added into that mix. Or it can be a more in-depth diet like the Paleo AIP diet, which AIP stands for Autoimmune Protocol Diet. And that one's pretty restrictive. It kind of takes out all the foods that could potentially be triggering your body. Can be super beneficial, especially if you do have some autoimmune type stuff going on. That's not the case for everybody. And I don't know that it's necessary for everybody, right? Many people, if they're doing the gut healing work, can do fine with a gentler approach to the elimination diet. But it's a little bit individual. It depends on your needs. Just some options to think about. And remember, any foods that you're sensitive to, let's say you were doing an elimination diet and you ended up through that process figuring out that you had a sensitivity to certain foods, or even just as you're doing the elimination part of the diet, you want to have a reintroduction plan. I see so many people. I've had clients come to me and say, oh, I've been doing the AIP diet for the last, 3 years. And that's one of those things that can kind of get you into trouble a little bit, because those type of diets are very restrictive. And that can be very therapeutic in the short term, but can also leave you with potential nutrient deficiencies in the long term. So my general recommendation is that any super restrictive diet should not be a long-term solution. And that, again, is why we do the gut healing work at the same time, so that we're hitting it from both ends. Now, I had a client who I've been working with for actually a little while now, and she came to me with gut symptoms really being kind of her primary concern. And at the time that she came to me, really her big struggle was she just felt like she couldn't eat anything, kind of like I was talking about earlier in this episode. She felt like pretty much anything that she ate would cause her to bloat and have an upset stomach. She felt like she just wasn't really digesting her food. And so for her, in her case, I did end up doing an MRT food sensitivity test as well as a GI map test. And so we did an elimination diet based on those food sensitivity test results, and also did some deep gut healing work at the same time. And later, after a time period of working on all of that, we went on to strategically start to reintroduce foods into her diet. And now it was really cool. I've seen a lot of progress in her over the time that I've been working with her. Slowly but surely, she's been able to reintroduce foods. It was a little bit of a process for her. Some people reintroduce foods really easily. For some people, it can take a little bit more time. But now, this is probably 6 months or so after we started working together, she reported that she was able to go on a 2-week-long trip with her husband and had no food reactions or GI symptoms that whole time, even with not being at home and eating her regular stuff. And that's like the best news ever for me to hear, because that was actually one of her big things stressing her out when she first came to me as a client, was that she was feeling like she couldn't travel and do things that she really loved to do because she was always so stressed out about the food piece. And actually, I didn't mention this before, but constipation was a huge thing for her too. Like, she would just very easily get kind of blocked up, and that, of course, causes a lot of pain and discomfort in your abdomen as well, which isn't very fun. So it was really nice to see that beautiful transformation happen, and she's able to eat so many more foods now is really the whole point of that story, because initially she was so limited. I mean, she was on this like very simple, basic diet, just trying to get through the day basically and try to get enough calories in. But she was being so restrictive in her diet, not because she just wanted to be on a restrictive diet, but because she actually just couldn't eat very much without upsetting her stomach, and was getting really frustrated because some of the foods that, worked for her last week, all of a sudden she couldn't eat anymore, and was pretty much in tears coming to me. And so it's really wonderful to see that transformation. And I think it just goes to show how powerful this work can be and how transformative it can be to work through both the food piece of it and the gut health piece of it. So I just wanted to share that story with you all today. So that really, my friend, is the basic idea here. Number one, you want to determine your unique food sensitivities, which can be different for everybody, which you can do through the testing or through some elimination diet type process. Number two, you want to do some gut healing work at the same time to make sure that you're supporting your body in not having more food sensitivities moving forward. And then number three, you want to be sure to reintroduce foods at the end of the day. Have an exit plan. Anytime you're doing an elimination diet, have an exit plan at the end of it. Super, super important. And along the way, you get to also watch your GI symptoms improve. Even the pain and fatigue and other endo symptoms can improve. It's the beginning of a root cause approach, because food can be a huge source of inflammation and immune dysfunction, as we talked about earlier. So it's not just about getting to the bottom of the food sensitivities and the GI stuff, but it's really about kind of the bigger picture supporting your endometriosis in general, which I think is awesome because that's the whole point. I'm all about a root cause approach because slapping Band-Aids on things just doesn't help anybody in the long term. Now, I wanted to touch on this too. This episode is all about food sensitivities, but one argument, I guess, that I hear a lot is that people just kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, yeah, right, like food will solve all of your problems. And my response to that is no, food will not solve all of your problems. I am very much a food-first practitioner. I work a lot with people on their diet and really supporting things through the nutrition that you're getting in your body. But it's not all of it, right? Food is not the only thing that you need, right? Endometriosis at the end of the day is fairly complex, and it really requires a multimodal approach. So food is a piece of the puzzle. It's not all of it, but it is absolutely an excellent start. For me, that was the starting point. I started with an elimination diet. I started with cutting out some of those inflammatory foods, and then later ended up taking a dive into gut health and hormone balance and nutrient status and deeper immune support and all the many, many, many things I have taken a dive into along my own journey, and similarly to what I do with my clients. It is the same process I take my one-on-one clients through. We take the food-first approach and then take a deep dive into the areas that they need most. All right, my friend, if you found this helpful and you would love some help with this process and knocking out those food sensitivities and gut issues once and for all, you can always find a link in the show notes to book a free 30-minute consultation with me, and I would be happy to chat. I do work with clients located anywhere in the United States since I work my practice virtually. So I would love to chat with you and hear a little bit more about your journey, and I hope you have the most wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share with a friend and subscribe so that you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step towards getting to the root cause of your endo symptoms like endo belly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to download my free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Until next time, my friend.